I inherited 1400 acres of hillside, and 3 days later, an HOA was digging under it. 5 heavy excavators were ripping into my hillside when I pulled up. Steel buckets smashed the slope as a concrete drainage pipe was dropped under my land, rainwater surging straight into it. The HOA president stepped forward and pointed at the trench. "That drainage system is community infrastructure," she said. "Once it's underground, the land above it isn't yours anymore." I thought she was bluffing until she handed me a map showing my hillside, shaded as HOA-controlled land. She leaned in and said, "You can fight us in court, or you can sign tonight and keep what we allow." That's when it hit me. They didn't build a culvert to stop flooding. They built it to take my land. She didn't wait for my answer. The HOA president snapped her fingers and the excavator swung back into motion, bucket teeth biting deeper into my hill. Mud slid past my boots. The culvert vanished another foot underground. "I'm Elena Cross," she said, raising her voice over the engine, "president of the Mesa Ridge HOA, and this site is now part of our stormwater system." I told her again it was my land. She waved a damp packet inches from my face, permits, diagrams, stamped headers. "Engineering approvals," she said. "Once infrastructure exists, ownership follows function. That's how counties see it." A foreman shouted a depth reading. Elena nodded without looking at him. "Keep going." I asked who authorized the easement. She smiled once. "You're confusing paperwork with reality." Then, for the first time, she said her motive out loud. 400 homes sit downhill. If this slope fails, people lose houses. I won't let one owner endanger the community. She stepped closer, boots sinking into the mud. "You can challenge us," she said, calm and practiced, "but while you argue, water keeps moving. And if you shut this down, every flooded living room points back to you." Behind her, the machines roared. A crew posted a temporary sign at my gate, "Flood control access, no trespassing." Elena glanced at her watch. "I'll give you tonight," she said. "Sign cooperation, avoid liens, keep your credit intact." Then she turned away and raised her hand. Another 10 feet. By the time I drove away that afternoon, they'd sunk the culvert another 8 feet. I came back the next morning with a survey map folded in my jacket and a steel tape clipped to my belt. Overnight, someone had driven stakes into my hillside, bright orange, evenly spaced, marching across the slope like they'd always been there. A temporary sign was zip-tied to my gate. "Flood control access authorized personnel." Only I cut the zip tie and dropped the sign in the mud. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. An HOA notice hit my inbox, accusing me of interfering with emergency infrastructure. The language was careful, almost polite. No threats yet. Just enough to say they were watching. When I reached the trench, I measured elevation myself. The numbers didn't lie. I'm a civil engineer. I work with grades, drainage, and site plans for a living. The natural flow didn't come from my hill, it came toward it. The culvert wasn't relieving pressure uphill. It was redirecting runoff from the HOA, pushing it under my land and dumping it out the other side. When I told the site foreman, he shrugged. "I build what I'm told." An SUV pulled up behind him. Elena Cross stepped out, clean boots this time. She didn't raise her voice. "You're escalating a safety issue," she said. "That won't end well for you." That was the first time she framed it that way, me as the problem. 2 days later, the board arrived. 5 people in windbreakers, clipboards tucked under their arms, walking my ridge like inspectors on a factory floor. One flew a drone without asking. Another snapped photos of my fence posts, my access road, my truck. Elena stood at the center and unfolded a large drainage map across the hood of her SUV. "This area is designated Stormwater Impact Zone," she said, tapping the page. "County guidance allows protective infrastructure where risk exists." I asked her to show me the easement. She didn't. Instead, she pointed to fine print at the bottom of the map, engineering language, not legal filing. I knew the difference. I worked with plats and grades for a living. "This isn't recorded," I said. "There's nothing filed with the county recorder." She smiled. "Technicalities don't stop floods." That afternoon, a second notice arrived, this one citing potential fines for obstructing community safety improvements. No dollar amount yet, just the phrase "subject to lien if unresolved." That's when I drove straight to the county office. The clerk pulled up the parcel history. My name sat clean on the title. No encumbrances, no easements, no stormwater rights granted to anyone. When I told her about the culvert, she frowned. We didn't approve anything underground there. By the time I got back to the hill, the HOA had posted another sign. Bigger this time. More official. They were turning presence into pressure. The invoice was buried in a spreadsheet the HOA didn't expect anyone outside the board to read. A contractor's billing line labeled Phase 1 Drainage Installation, $182,400. Another line below it, future capacity allowance. That phrase stuck with me. I pulled county development filings and found the answer an hour later. A rezoning request pending behind my Ridge luxury housing, clustered lots, private road access. Estimated project value $2.4 million. The culvert wasn't sized for today's runoff, it was sized for what was coming next. When I confronted Elena with that, her tone changed. "This is bigger than you," she said. "Development happens. Water has to go somewhere." I asked her why the culvert crossed 60 acres of my land instead of staying on HOA property. She didn't answer directly. "If you force us to reroute," she said, "you delay housing, raise costs, and put families at risk. That kind of exposure follows people." That was the moment it stopped feeling like a dispute and started feeling like a calculation. They'd already spent 6 figures. They'd already promised capacity they didn't legally control, and now they needed my hill to make the numbers work. As if to prove it, a new notice arrived that evening, this one CCing a county office I'd never dealt with before. The word compliance appeared 3 times. I stood on the ridge as the sun went down, watching water disappear into a pipe that shouldn't exist. They weren't just trying to take land, they were trying to make stopping them look irresponsible. And if I moved wrong, they'd make sure everyone downstream knew my name. The county engineer met me on site the next morning. He didn't bring a clipboard, just boots, a laser level, and a look that said he already suspected something was wrong. We walked the trench in silence while the excavators idled uphill, engines rumbling like they were waiting for permission to finish the job. He checked elevations. He traced the pipe's direction with his boot. Then he stood still and stared downhill. "This isn't a relief system," he said. "It's a transfer." That word mattered. He explained it plainly. Stormwater was being intercepted before it reached the HOA, shoved under my land, and discharged past my boundary. The culvert didn't protect the neighborhood, it protected the developer's timeline. When I asked about approvals, he shook his head. No easement, no permit, and definitely no county sign-off for underground infrastructure on private land. By noon, my phone lit up. An HOA attorney left a voicemail warning me not to tamper with critical safety systems. A second message followed this one, hinting at liability if flooding occurred due to obstruction. The implication was clear: if water backed up, they'd point at me. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. She didn't call back right away. Instead, she emailed a draft injunction, temporary restraining order language, tight enough to freeze construction immediately. It named the HOA, the contractor, and the developer entity tied to the rezoning request. "Once we file," she said, when she finally called, "they can't hide behind urgency anymore. But be ready. They'll try to make you the villain before the judge ever sees the facts." That afternoon, code enforcement arrived, sent, I later learned, by an HOA complaint. They walked my access road, took photos, asked about permits for my own fence repairs. It was bureaucratic pressure, not force. But it was deliberate. Elena showed up again, this time with a different tone. "You're dragging public agencies into this," she said quietly. "That doesn't end well." I told her the county engineer had already flagged the culvert. Her jaw tightened. "Then you understand the stakes." I did, and so did she. The whistleblower message came after dark. No name at first, just a file drop link and one line of text. You should see what they changed. Inside were redlined engineering plans. The originals showed a smaller pipe terminating on HOA land. The revised versions extended the line straight under my ridge, annotated with a scanned signature from an engineer who, according to county records, had retired 3 years earlier. There was more. An internal board email chain where Elena argued that filing an easement would slow momentum and risk public objections. Another message tied the culvert's capacity directly to the pending development's runoff projections. This wasn't improvisation. It was a plan. I sent everything to my lawyer. She replied with one word: gold. By morning, the injunction was ready. Before we could file, Elena called me herself. No threats this time. No legal language. "There's a storm coming," she said. "A big one." I could hear rain in the background where she was standing. "If that culvert isn't finished," she continued, "the neighborhood floods. Insurance companies ask questions. County supervisors get involved. People start pointing fingers." She paused. "You don't want to be that finger." I told her the culvert was illegal. She lowered her voice. "Illegal things get fixed quietly all the time." Then she said the line that changed everything. "Once the water moves, ownership arguments stop mattering." That was it. The admission she didn't realize she'd made. I hung up and filed. Within an hour, word spread. Homeowners started emailing, confused, angry, scared. Someone posted photos of the trench online, with captions asking why heavy equipment was on private land. The HOA announced an emergency community meeting for that evening. Storm warnings were already scrolling across local news. By sunset, sheriff's cruisers rolled into the parking lot of the community center, not for me, but for crowd control. County officials were on their way. So was the developer's lawyer. I stood at the edge of my ridge, watching clouds stack up the culvert half buried beneath my feet. They'd tried to turn urgency into ownership. Now urgency was about to put everyone in the same room with the truth. The community center was already full when I walked in. Rain rattled the windows hard enough to drown out side conversations. Folding chairs packed the room, neighbors standing along the walls, wet jackets draped over their arms. At the front table, Elena Cross sat, rigid hands folded, a microphone angled toward her like it still belonged to her. She stood as soon as the meeting was called to order. "This is a safety issue," she said, voice steady, practiced. "A private landowner is interfering with emergency stormwater work that protects hundreds of homes. With this storm approaching, delays put lives and property at risk." A murmur rolled through the room. She lifted a photo of the trench on the screen. "That culvert prevents flooding. Shutting it down is reckless." Then she turned, finally acknowledging me. "We asked for cooperation. We were refused." Before I could respond, the doors at the back opened. 2 county officials stepped in, rain dripping off their coats, followed by a sheriff's deputy. The room went quiet in a way that felt physical. One of the officials raised a hand. "We're here regarding an emergency injunction filed this afternoon." Elena's expression flickered just for a second. The county investigator took the microphone, not looking at Elena. "We reviewed the drainage installation on the hillside," he said. "There is no recorded easement, no permit, and no authorization for underground infrastructure on that parcel." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I stood and handed over the documents my lawyer had prepared. The investigator projected them one by one, the original engineering plans, then the altered versions. Side by side, clear enough for anyone to see the extensions under my land. "This signature," he said, tapping the screen, "belongs to an engineer who retired years before these plans were submitted." Then came the invoices. $182,400 paid from HOA funds. Capacity specs that matched a pending $2.4 million development uphill. A man near the front stood up. "You told us this was flood protection." The investigator nodded. "The system is sized for future runoff tied to development, not current neighborhood flow." Elena reached for the microphone. "You're misinterpreting," the investigator cut her off. "And finally, we have correspondence advising against filing an easement to avoid public scrutiny." The room didn't murmur this time. It went still. Elena stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "You're ignoring context," she said, voice tight now. "Stormwater doesn't wait for paperwork. Once water starts moving, ownership arguments stop mattering." The county official turned slowly. "That's an interesting statement," he said, "because it aligns exactly with the altered plans we're reviewing." She froze. The sheriff stepped forward. "Miss Cross, we're placing a hold on all activity related to this installation, effective immediately." A board member leaned toward her. "Elena, did you know about the plan changes?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then snapped. "I did what I had to do to keep this community safe." That was the last thing she said as president. The board chair cleared his throat. "Effective. Now I'm calling a vote to remove Elena Cross from her position, pending investigation." Hands went up, one after another, unanimous. Elena looked around the room, searching for support that wasn't there. People avoided her eyes. She grabbed her bag and walked out without another word, rain swallowing her as the doors closed behind her. The county official faced the room. "The culvert will be shut down and removed. Any damages and remediation costs will be assessed to the HOA and associated parties." I sat back down, heart pounding, as the weight of the room shifted away from me. For the first time all night, no one was pointing. No one stood up when Elena walked out. The rain still hammered the roof, but the room felt quieter, heavier, like everyone had realized they'd been holding their breath for days without noticing. A man near the aisle finally broke the silence. "So, we never owned that land?" he asked, not accusing anyone in particular. The county official answered plainly, "No, you never did." A ripple moved through the chairs, confusion, then embarrassment. A woman shook her head and whispered, "They told us it was already approved." Another admitted she'd asked about permits and been told it was handled at a higher level. No one defended Elena. No one even said her name. The anger that had been pointed at me earlier in the week had nowhere to go now. It dissolved into an uncomfortable understanding that they'd been used. I felt the tension drain from my shoulders. For the first time since the excavators arrived, I wasn't preparing for another accusation or threat. The room wasn't against me anymore, it was reckoning with what had almost happened. My phone buzzed on the table. I set it on speaker without standing. My lawyer's voice came through clear and controlled, like she was reading a checklist she'd already won. The emergency injunction was granted, effective immediately. All construction on my land was frozen. The altered engineering plans were voided. The alleged easement had been formally rejected and flagged in the county system to prevent any future filing without my signature and an independent survey. The HOA would be responsible for full removal of the drainage system, environmental remediation, and all related costs, a mid-six-figure liability shared with the contractor and the development entity tied to the rezoning request. The county official nodded as each point landed, confirming it aloud so the room could hear it from more than one source. This wasn't a victory lap. There were no cheers, just the sound of certainty, replacing speculation. The kind of certainty that makes people sit back and stop arguing because the decision is no longer theirs to debate. The meeting ended without applause. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. I stayed seated while people filed past, some nodding, some murmuring apologies, most just quiet. The board chair stopped beside me and said the access signs would be removed before sunrise. No speeches. No promises beyond what was already ordered. When I drove back up the ridge, sheriff tape fluttered where the excavators had been parked hours earlier. The engines were gone. The lights were off. The trench sat half-filled with rainwater, going nowhere now. I stepped out and walked to the edge of the slope boots, sinking into the mud. My survey marker was still there, crooked but intact. I straightened it and pressed it deeper into the soil until it held. Not as a gesture, as a fact. The hill was quiet again. No machines, no warnings, no claims layered over it. Just wind-wet earth and land that hadn't moved, no matter how hard they tried to force it. They tried to take my land by burying it, but the truth surfaced faster than their water ever could.